Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us for our latest segment on Facebook Live. I am Michelle Adams. I am the Family Engagement Liaison here at Western. This afternoon, we are going to spend some time talking with Bre Traynor. She is our Mental Health Outreach Coordinator, and we're going to talk a little bit about supporting your struggling student. With many students returning home for the first time this week, the first time perhaps since they set foot on campus in August, there may be some changes in personalities or behaviors or appearances even. Oh, we're sideways. Oh, I guess we do need to turn the phone. Okay, we'll adjust. Okay, thank you, Brittany. There may be some things that you may notice differently about your student, so we'd like to take a little bit of time to talk about that in preparation for your student's return home. So Bre, if you want to take a minute and introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks. So my name is Bre Traynor, and I'm the Assistant Director for Mental Health Outreach on our campus here at Western. A little bit about my background is I have my Master's in Counseling Psychology from the University of Minnesota. Thank you. And some of my past experiences through work have included working at an autism center, working at an eating disorder clinic, working in residence life at North Dakota State University for a couple of years, and most recently, before coming to Western, I was a school counselor at a middle school, so I'm a licensed school counselor as well. And I've been here in my position for just about a year.
Right. And we are so grateful to have Bre here on our campus. She does a lot of training with our faculty and staff as well as our students. And so what we thought would be helpful would be to share some of that information with you as parents. Our faculty and staff is really in the loop on those things that they can look for while they're working with students, and we thought this might be helpful for parents as well with your students returning home. So with that being said, Bre, if you could share with us just a little bit of information about what are considered typical behaviors for college students at this point, as opposed to those atypical behaviors that parents might really need to pay attention to when their students return home.
Yeah. So one of the things that I just want to mention kind of before getting into those typical behaviors is that we do a study on our campus every 2 years to learn about the health of our students, including mental health. And one of the things that always stands out to me is that 1 in 3 of our Western Michigan students has been diagnosed with a mental illness at some point in their life. So I just think that that's pretty significant, that's 30%, 33% of our students have been diagnosed. So just kind of normalizing that some students don't struggle or don't have a diagnosis of something like that, but a number of students do, like quite a bit more than ever historically on college campuses. So when getting into some more typical behavior of things that we see most students kind of navigating or figuring out when they're first coming to college or even in the middle. So sleep schedules, I think, is just one big one.
Right.
Sleep can be a little bit wacky or irregular. So a lot of students don't always have a consistent sleep schedule or eating schedule. Some certainly do, but I guess what I would see or notice a lot is that students stay up late, sleep in, making it sometimes difficult to make it to those earlier classes. But I think sleep and eating behaviors can just be irregular. I feel like that's pretty typical. In addition to that, we see a lot of stress, sometimes more than I think that we would wish. And one of the studies that we do as well, we've learned that over 50% of our students feel an overwhelming amount of stress at times, kind of if they were to go on average of the last year. So I think just overall stress about the difficulty of academics and maybe things that they didn't anticipate how it might be. Academics is a big stressor. The other big stressor that we see our students struggling with is finances. So for better or for worse, that's just something that we see as being kind of typical, that our students are stressed about those different pieces. Other typical things, I have written down in my notes that social media is just something that I think, as I'm sure as parents that can see at home even before their students came to college, that social media is just a really big part of their lives. Again, for better or for worse, I think sometimes that can play into stress or like a negative comparison game, sort of, with maybe how their their friends who are at a different college campus, or maybe they're having the time of their life and our student is maybe struggling in some way. So I just think social media and the use of that is so typical. It's just how students are connecting a lot these days. So very typical to use that, and then figuring out time management along with that. Now, the use of their time. This is a time where students are adjusting and figuring out how to manage themselves and manage their own time. They don't have parents, telling them it's time to do homework, it's time to go to bed, it's dinner time. So they're really trying to figure out and navigate that time and how to spend it wisely. So I think some students do that well right off the bat, and some students not so much. So just figuring out how to use their time in general is part of a typical student right now.
Right, and finding that adjustment between what worked in high school may not work now. They may need to adjust things to find something that's a little bit more suitable to the higher education setting. So a lot of things that can really stress our students out. So families may notice this when their students come home. And one thing that sticks with me that you mentioned, Bre, is the sleep cycle and how things are so kind of irregular when they're here. I know myself, when my students came home from college, they slept a lot. Being in their own bed, in their own space, being around family, it's relaxing for them. So my students I remember the boys would come home at night and they'd sleep well past noon the following day. They just need to catch up. And they're used to being up late, sleeping late if they can on the weekends. So that's pretty normal and to be expected. So a lot of factors.
Yeah, thanks for
a lot
adding
of
that
things.
in.
Yeah.
A couple other just quick pieces too that I think it can be pretty typical for students to feel nervous about connecting with staff or faculty. I think as an adult it can feel so easy to say, like, stop into their office hours or connect with them after class or before class if something's not going well or whatever, they want to talk to a professor. But I do think that a lot of students struggle with like that nervousness about approaching a staff or faculty member, even though they're, I'd say 9 times out of 10 they're approachable people, just like you and I. But I think it can feel really nerve-wracking to do that.
And very intimidating. And one thing that we've recommended in the past is to encourage your student to maybe talk with a peer, talk with their resident assistant, or observe another classmate interacting with their instructor. That may set their mind at ease and maybe give them some tips for interacting and making that connection with their instructor, because those connections can be priceless down the road. Just having that established relationship can really help your student in the long run.
Yeah, and then the last thing, I think some students take on too little, but other students take on too much. Like, they want to get involved in everything, which is awesome, but sometimes it can amount to too much, and then that attributes to too much, stress, where they don't have time to do it all. And so learning how to say no to some things if they're overwhelmed, but also learning how to say yes to new things if they are wanting to get involved but are not sure how to. So just trying to figure out that balance too. There's so much balancing. So a typical student, it's hard to even say like what a typical student is, because they're all so different. But those are things that I would say, in terms of looking at things that might be more of a red flag or things that we might worry about, those are things that are typical.
Okay, so let's take some time to talk about those indicators, those red flags that we might notice with a student who's struggling. As we both know, there can be physical changes, there can be changes in their personal life, or a definite impact on their academic time here. So you want to share some information about that as well?
Yeah, so it definitely kind of ranges. Again, like it can be subjective and different for the individual. I'd say one of the take-home points with noticing if your student is struggling or if you should be concerned is noticing a change in something. So they're not like they used to be, or there's something that, there's some variability in that, right? But it's more if you know that X is a typical thing for them, they always wear this type of clothing, or they always talk to this person, or something like that, and then all of a sudden that is different, those can be red flags. So I think it just really helps, the better you know your student,
Mm-hmm.
the more you're able to recognize these signs. So one of them that I just kind of mentioned is appearance. So if your student has a change in hygiene or how they're taking care of themselves, their body, how they're dressing, if the way they do their makeup has changed or anything like that, or even wearing oversized clothing or sweatshirts all the time. I mean, I don't know. It's just, again, variability.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I would say, as we all know, college is a time of great growth for our students. So there is some exploration, I think, they're
sure.
exposed to so many different personalities and cultures and experiences that they may try some of those out themselves with maybe a piercing or a tattoo or a change in their style. So as a parent, you really want to be tuned in to what your student might be going through, what they're experimenting with or trying out. Or one thing we're going to touch on later is having those conversations. Like, this could be a red flag. How do I know? How can I talk with my student? So we will touch on that shortly as well.
Right. So these can be some indicators, but again, for some, it's not. Like getting a tattoo or a piercing, it's not going to be a big deal. But for some others, that is a big deal. So it's just kind of really, again, dependent. Another thing that I'd say is one of the bigger indicators is their behavior and how that may have changed. So obviously going out and hanging out with friends and something like that is pretty typical. But if we're noticing that a student is out partying a lot or different things like that, maybe they're just kind of dazed, they're out of it, or they have a ton of energy, or if they're withdrawing and staying in their room and not really talking to many people, not going to class. So there's a lot of things of their behavior that can be a big indicator. So that's a big one. Obviously, like their mood or disposition. So if they seem anxious, kind of fidgety, or they're just, kind of, I don't know how else to describe it. Like just anxious, you can kind of tell with that, or even if they're down, if they're just not wanting to kind of have a flat affect, they don't really want to engage or talk or anything like that. That would be something that could be a potential concern as well. Let's see, relationship changes, that can be one too. Like if relationship with a parent, if they always, they call you once a week and that's become kind of a new norm, and then maybe now they're not connecting at all with you, or even thinking of friends from high school or friends here in college, like who are they making relationships with? Have friendships changed dramatically? Maybe someone that they were best friends with in high school and now all of a sudden they're not. Like just different things that interpersonally that can be a change. Sleep and eating patterns as well, as much as they can be irregular. I think keeping in mind if a student is getting not enough sleep consistently, not sleeping very, very much or very well, or if they're sleeping a ton, those can be red flags. And same with eating. If they're not eating very much or eating too much, kind of those kinds of things can be red flags. And then getting more into the academic area, grades obviously can be a big indicator. If their grades aren't doing so great, not passing certain things or certain subjects are struggling, we more see it as a red flag if it's across the board. So not just one academic area, like one subject, but if multiple are difficult and they're not doing well there. And then just level of interest or motivation to be in class or be in school. So that's one. And then sometimes perfectionism as well can feed into anxiety, or just that they absolutely need to, get a 98 to 100%, and just getting anxious if they're not, or those kinds of things. So do you have anything to add in terms of being a parent in your own life, Michelle?
I guess the one thing, and we've already kind of touched on this, is just viewing all of this through the lens of this is such a huge time of change for your student anyway, especially if they're a first-year student here. So these things can happen and be completely normal. It's all about knowing your student and kind of anticipating as a parent that when they come home for that first time, things are going to feel a little different. There will be changes in your student, and I think the more, as parents, the more we are prepared for that, the better off we are. And if we have this information and these tools, it's not as shocking when your student comes home and they want to sleep all the time, or they maybe have dinner with you, but they're looking at their watch or checking their phone, and then they're gone. They're out with their friends from
Right.
high school. The next day, they're going to go to the homecoming football game at their old high school. Or, unfortunately, we kind of become agenda items for our students when they come home, and that's a big change. I know it was a change as I was a college student. I know it was a change for my family, and now as a parent of college students, I know it's difficult. Life goes on at home, and your student has a new life at school, and when they come home, your life is still happening. I can just tell you, my son was on break last weekend, and he came home, unfortunately, in a very hectic weekend for our family. I was here working at homecoming for both Saturday and Sunday. In addition to that, we had sports activities for the other kids, and I feel like I saw him this much, and that's really hard. So trying to be realistic about your expectations and realistic about the changes your student may be going through, and just doing the best you can to support them, and know your student. Trust that you know your student well enough that you will notice if there's something that you really need to be concerned about.
Yeah. Thank you. Maybe we want to come back to expectations too. I know we were going to talk about that a little bit
let's
later.
do that.
But I want to get into, so those are could be some red flags. It doesn't necessarily mean, so those things that I mentioned, it doesn't mean that something is wrong or that you need to take immediate action. Those are just things that could be potential indicators that you may want to ask about just to see how things are going, like a check-in. But I do want to mention too that there are some things that would be more concerning or may indicate more of a crisis level of response for students. And these may seem obvious, but I think it's still worth pointing out that if your student or somebody is talking about harming themselves or harming other people, that would obviously be a concern. If you see any self-injury or any behavior talking about that, or seeing any cuts or anything on their body, obviously would be a concern. Loss of contact with reality. So if your student just doesn't seem like they're necessarily making sense in the statements that they're making, or they don't really seem like they're here in the present with us. A big one that I'd say one of the bigger indicators is that withdrawing. So if they're just staying in their room, they're not talking to people, not going to class, not even wanting to talk to you maybe. So withdrawing, and I say that's more of a crisis if it's happening over a longer period of time. So obviously, some students will have a day where they just want to stay in bed all day, and that's okay. But if that withdrawing is happening over multiple facets of their life and with multiple people, and it's happening over a longer period of time, that would be concerning. If a student is talking about wanting to end it all, or making statements like it's just not worth it anymore, or
it doesn't matter,
or it'd be better off if I wasn't here. So some of those statements that are kind of leading into maybe suicidal thoughts, those would be something we needed to ask about. Those are concerning. And then again, kind of going on with that suicidal thought sort of mindset, if a student is giving away possessions or just doesn't want to have their things and they're just giving things away, that would be a red flag, like a big kind of crisis concern as well.
I think this is a perfect segue for us to talk next about how do we prepare for these conversations? How do we talk to our student in a way that they don't feel defensive, that they don't feel attacked, that they don't feel that we're picking them apart? And these can be conversations about the simple changes we may have noticed in them, right up to those things that we feel are red flags or could be close to crisis nature. So Bre, tell us a little bit about how we can have those conversations in a way that's productive and feels comfortable for our student, and will hopefully provide the results that we need.
Yeah, I think first and foremost is catching your student at the right time. Obviously, there could be times where they're automatically going to be defensive, and I feel like as a parent you just might know when they're in a certain mood, it's not a good time to have that conversation.
Yes.
And if you just had an argument, or they're a little hot-headed in a moment, they need to calm down, so give them that space. So those are just times where it wouldn't be the best time.
Not ideal.
So I guess first and foremost, just trying to catch them in a moment where it feels like a good time and they're in an okay mood, to a good mood, right? Catching them in a bad mood is just kind of setting yourself up for potential failure in the conversation. So hoping that you can catch them in a good mood or a good time or good space. I think also paying attention to where you're talking to them. If you're at the dinner table with other siblings around, might not be the best situation. And they may not want to share any real personal things going on with them at that time because they don't want their siblings to know.
Mm-hmm.
So even thinking about the people who are around and the space. So, I think those are just really nice times if you can catch them either in their room or maybe there's a moment where you just have the two of you. So I think those can just can make it feel like a safer space or a
Mm-hmm.
better time to talk. If you find a place that's feels appropriate and the time feels appropriate, depending on how difficult, sometimes this conversation can feel anxiety provoking even for the parent
Mm-hmm.
or anyone who's trying to help. But what you would want to do is just try to stay calm, take a deep breath sometimes if that helps, and then the other piece too is paying attention to your tone of voice. I think if you're coming in real kind of a parent mode of, you don't want to demand information, you don't want to come across as necessarily being authoritative, but you want to have your tone of voice coming from a place of, I'm just wanting to understand.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I want to understand what's going on with you, and I want to be supportive. So even just paying attention to your tone of voice.
Right, and this is all part of that shifting role, I think.
Yeah.
When we send our students off to college in August, we're still thinking of them as teenagers, high school students. I'm the parent, they're the student. They're adults now. We are always parents, that doesn't change, but I think our relationships change, and
Mm-hmm.
we really need to give that some thought in how we frame our questions and how we approach some of these situations and concerns with our students. So this may be the first time that you encounter that when your student comes home, and it's something I think that takes some adjusting and some practice, and it doesn't always feel comfortable because you always feel like, well, I'm the parent and I need to know this, and your student is an adult now living independently here, at the university, and it's quite a change for them. And like we've stressed during orientation, the growth happens not only for our students but for our families, and it can be challenging for all of us.
Yeah. So feeling that relationship change a little bit.
Right.
So going into that conversation, I think one of the most helpful tips I can give is to not just go in and sit down and say, so how are you, right? Because I think that kind of sets us up for like, good, how are you? Kind of typical small talk. I think it's much more helpful if you can go in and say, hey, so I've noticed a couple of things. I've noticed you've been sleeping a lot, and it seems like you haven't been really going to class a whole lot. Is everything okay? Or whatever the situation, whatever you've been noticing. I think it's really helpful to say, this is what I've noticed, and then check in.
Mm-hmm.
I think that sets it up for your student to realize, okay, they've noticed a couple of things. They've noticed some things that might be off or they might be different. So you're communicating that you're paying attention to them and that you care. So whether that check-in is, hey, you seem kind of down today. I'm worried about you. Is everything okay? Whatever that is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So some kind of sentence in there. But I really think it's helpful to state those observations of what you're noticing. Then from there, depending on, hopefully your student will open up to you. If not, you've planted the seed that you're here to talk with them or to listen. But if they do start opening up about whatever might be going on, it's really helpful to validate their feelings and validate what they're going through. Even the statement of saying like, "Oh, that sounds like a lot." It sounds like you've got a lot on your plate right now. It can be a really vague response even, but to validate that, you don't want to minimize what they're going through. You don't want to say like, "Oh, you can handle it. It'll be fine." That minimizes what they're going through.
Mm-hmm.
So really just saying like that, it sounds really hard, or like you've got a lot going on, or whatever, again, the situation is, but validating what they're going through is their experience for them in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
So lots of other really good things. I think just listening, really giving your full attention and trying to not be distracted. I know we're often distracted by our phones or siblings or different things that are going on in the background. So if you're going into this conversation, try to have that time to give them your full attention. One of the things that I like the most is saying, what would be most helpful for you right now? Like what would be, if there's anything that I can do, like what would be helpful?
Mm-hmm.
We don't want to assume that we know what they need. And, I think sometimes, I don't know, as parents, or even as a helper or a friend or whatever, as humans, we think we know what somebody needs.
Right. Or even, I think even, myself as a parent often think that my child is telling me this because they want me to fix it or they want me to solve it. And one thing that I've noticed as my children have grown is they just need to vent. Listening is what they want from me. And just to be heard and be validated with, wow, that sounds like a lot. Or, boy, I bet that was disappointing. That's all they want. They don't want mom to say, well, did you talk to this person? Did you call that one? How about if I do this for you? That's not what they want.
Right.
Nor is that what we should do, honestly.
Right.
This is a turning point for a lot of families and parents with their students here. So just taking that time to listen, whether it's a phone call they make to home or a conversation you have during their visit, being that person that they now can view as someone that they can vent to, they can share their concerns or their feelings with without feeling like you're going to fix it for them or you're going to troubleshoot and come up with all the answers. They just need to share it. So be open to that and be willing to just listen and validate.
Yes.
Like Bre said, that really gives them comfort in knowing, okay, they heard what I said. They think this would be hard too. Okay, it's not just me.
Yeah, and you don't need to leave the conversation with a solution.
Right.
I think sometimes we think that we need to have ideas of how to fix it or a solution, and you don't. I mean, I think really a lot of the times we just need someone to listen.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And even beyond that, like Bre mentioned, offering, how can I be helpful? What would you like me to do to help you in this situation? And it may be nothing, or it may be, can we talk about this some more? Or I wanted to look into this. Do you know of anything about this? Or whatever. Let them define that. Let them have a voice in that. And I think that will help establish this new changing relationship with your student.
Absolutely. One of the things that would work really well when I was in a school counseling role with the students that I would work with is instead of fixing the problem or saying what they should do or giving any advice, I would just say, you know what, let's just write down a bunch of ideas. Mm-hmm. So what are some options? What are some things that you could do? So you could, you come up with some ideas, I'll come up with some ideas. Some of them might be terrible. Even if you don't want to see a counselor, let's put it on there. It's an option, or whatever it might be. So let's just write down some ideas, and then we can narrow it down from there. And then the choice really is on the student. They've now are leaving with some different options, and they feel like they've got a choice in what their next steps are. So I've found that can work really well. I think with anybody, honestly.
Sure. It's very valuable.
Yeah. So I think again, when we respond, there's just lots and lots of things, but it'll depend on the conversation. It'll depend on the situation. But I think some of those tips are just saying what you've noticed, and that check-in, validating their feelings, providing empathy, not just saying, I'm really sorry you're going through that, but more saying that sounds like you're going through, that's really hard. So really listening, seeking to understand, not just to respond, and staying out of judgment too. Not judging as a parent, or back in my day, or I wouldn't have done that. Those are just things that are not going to be helpful. So trying to really just feel where the experience that they might be coming from, and don't be judgmental about it.
Right, trying to meet them where they're at, really.
Yeah. So I think, if there's more questions about that, you're welcome to chime in. But
yes, definitely send your questions in. We will read them right here live on the screen and answer them. Or as a follow-up, once we are done with our Facebook Live session today, we will respond to any questions that you send in response to the video that will be posted. So feel free to do that when it's convenient for you.
Yeah.
All right. Did you have anything else, Bre, that we should touch on today?
Yeah, so I think we wanted to talk a little bit about resources for parents.
Definitely.
And what to do, if if you want to recommend or brainstorm some different ideas that they can visit or be here on campus once they come back, or just how to offer those. So sometimes I think bringing up those things so if you're making a brainstorm list, for example, you could say, have you thought about seeing a counselor? Have you thought about talking to your academic advisor? Have you, just asking the question, have you thought about it? It's very different than saying, I think you should see a counselor, or you should probably go and talk to your academic advisor. So even the way that we phrase the help or the options can make a big difference, I think. Again, asking how can I help, and just letting them answer ways that you can help. One of the things that I really want to point parents to is our student concern form. So we have this form on our student affairs website, and I think we could even add the link to the video comments.
Yes, we can do that
before we leave today. The student concern form is a form online that anyone in our campus community or parents can fill out. So a lot of times we have faculty and staff who fill out the form. Some students, we don't often get a ton from parents, so it's totally open to parents as well. So this is a way to submit a concern to our Dean of Students office, just to let us know to check in with your student from the Dean of Students office. Our case manager would check in with them. So what you would do on the form is you type in the student's name and what might be going on and some of the things that you might be concerned about. There's a couple other questions, but really that's the short of it, and then you click submit. And what happens with that form is once submitted, our case manager, actually there's a team of folks in student affairs who would receive that concern, keeping it confidential, of course, and our case manager, Kenny Martin is his name, and he follows up with students. So depending on the acuteness to severity of what's going on, he usually starts with an email check-in to say, hey, someone was concerned about you. He keeps it anonymous and then says, can I offer support or resources, and he sets up a meeting time with the student. So it's just a nice way to put a student on our radar if somebody's concerned, so that we can do some additional check-in. And then obviously, if it's a higher level concern, some additional steps are taken to check in and make sure that students are safe and okay.
Right. And I would say even in addition to the student concern form, we encourage families to always reach out to the Office of Family Engagement. We are here to offer you support and resources and suggestions, as well as information about the concern form or any other support services we have on campus. So do feel free to send an email or give us a call if you're more comfortable with that as a starting point in supporting your student. And I will share the link to the student concern form. My technical inabilities are shining through right now, so I will do that after the broadcast. I will put that on our as one of the comments on our Facebook page.
The other one that I want to both, I guess, that I want to mention are Syndicuse Health Center and counseling services. So the Syndicuse Health Center, as these things you probably have learned during orientation, but I just want to touch on a couple pieces. So the Syndicuse Health Center is like our health services clinic. So it accepts insurances. So they're not free services, but they bill insurance. The reason I mention that is that a lot of students, if they don't want to see a counselor, but they still might have some mental health concerns, a lot of students will go to a primary care doctor there. And a lot of students will, if they need refills or are interested in depression medicine or anxiety medicine, anything like that those can be more acute diagnoses, a primary care doc can help with those. So I just point that out because sometimes students don't want to see a counselor, so that can be another option. Again, the health center bills insurance. On the flip side, counseling services is no cost to students at all. It's no cost, and there's individual counseling, couples counseling, and group counseling available. There's a number of groups that are available, and you can find those on the counseling services website. the ones that they offer. So again, no cost. A student can walk in. They don't need to make an appointment their first visit. The first visit they'll do what they call an intake appointment to learn about the student. It's a little bit more of like an interview so that they can make sure that they're setting the student up with the best services that they need. So yeah, it's just, I think it's one of the only times in somebody's life where they'll have free counseling available. So
Right.
and some students will go once or twice, and that helps, like that's all that they really needed, and some students go throughout the course of the semester or year. So it really just depends.
Right. And I think one thing to keep in mind as well about our counseling center practitioners is they are all trained in higher education needs. So they can understand and relate and support your student through any struggles or challenges they may be facing while they're here at Western. So they are specially trained to be responsive to that.
Yeah. Let's see, what else do I want to mention? I think the last thing that I want to mention as far as more of a crisis type of a situation is our public safety. So Western Michigan Public Safety. If our campus police will do welfare checks and things like that. If you're really concerned about a student, if in the event that a parent is calling public safety, we would also like to know on the student affairs dean of students side, just so that we are helping as along with the parent, and so that we can support the student. But just knowing that that our public safety will respond to high-level concerns outside of the typical office work week. So they really have been, they're great liaisons for the emotional support of students in emotional crises, and so they're trained in that way as well. So not just for students who are breaking the rules, but they
Right.
really are trained for the emotional response as well, and so we work with them in that. Yeah.
Great. All right. Doesn't look like we have any questions so far. We'll give you a few more minutes to chime in with any questions you may have. In addition, I will say if you have questions that you perhaps don't want to pose on the Facebook page, that's completely understandable. Feel free to email them to Family Engagement, and we can respond personally to you with any questions or concerns, or put you in contact with Bre as well if it's something that she might be able to help you with.
I can mention it as we're seeing if there's anyone who has questions. A couple other resources that I tell students about is the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline and the National Crisis Text Line. So those are ones that I share out to students in presentations that I do, so that students have, I think in particular the text line, because students don't always like to pick up a phone and call.
Right.
They prefer to text. So it's a national text line, but what students can do is, they just type and someone will respond, within a certain short time limit, and they can connect them to local resources as well. So those are 24/7 around the clock support for students, which is nice. That number, I want to say it's 741-741, but you could also easily Google the National Crisis Text Line. So that's one that I like to share with students. And then the last one too is disability services. I think can be a really great resource if a student is struggling, and it's impacting academics as well, and
Right.
just trying to see if we can do some additional supports so we can help in that way. Yeah.
Good. A lot of great, helpful information this morning, or this afternoon, I should say. Again, thank you for joining us. Feel free to follow up with any questions either on our Facebook page or by emailing or calling, and we will respond to those as needed. We hope you found this helpful, and we're always open to your suggestions for additional ideas or things that you would like us to cover in future segments of Facebook Live. So with that, thanks again for joining us. We hope you have a great afternoon.
Thank you.